All right, y'all, welcome to the show. I got a big one for you today. I'm playing catch up a little bit. So we're going to get to Israel announcing a new illegal West Bank land grab. We have Kamala's somewhat shocking comments about potentially punishing Israel if they go ahead with the invasion of Rafah. Look, I'll believe it when I see it, but I'm going to show you what she said. It's certainly more than I would have expected her to say. Then we'll get to the IDF TikToking more of their war crimes casually. And then later on in the show, we have a huge terror attack in Russia that we're going to break down for you. AOC admits that Israel is committing a genocide. This is something that when she was confronted about it not that long ago, she didn't use that word. Now she's using that word in speeches on the House floor and also on CNN to Jake Tapper's face. Then we'll get to Trump may get bailed out by a billionaire. You guys know that he owes $464 million for the fraud fine in New York. Looks like he may get a lifeline, although that's a little up in the air. The specifics of that are a little up in the air. Then we'll get to more Republican Civil War stuff. They're trying to oust Mike Johnson, who just became Speaker like 7 seconds ago. Marjorie Taylor Greene is leading that charge. And Destiny versus Jordan Peterson. That was incredibly unhinged. Wait until you see some of the stuff that JP said. Wild, man. Wild. So we'll get to all that and more. Everybody do me a big favor. Please subscribe to the channel. Helps out massively in the algorithm. Costs you nothing. We're trying to get to 10 mil, and that'll be a while. But you grow it one at a time, so hook a brother up with a sub. All right. Without any further ado, let's get into it here. A lot of stuff has happened on the Israel front in the past week or two. Let me go ahead and break all this down for you. So first of all, there was a UN resolution that came up. It was led by the U.S. And the way this was portrayed to the American public and the world more broadly is, hey man, we're trying to get a ceasefire. We are the ones who are in favor of a ceasefire. And this is how the media dutifully reported it. There's a problem with that, though. It was actually not a ceasefire resolution. It contained all of the weasel words and the language that sort of dances around the question of a ceasefire and says, like, we want you to engage in the process of determining whether or not there will be a ceasefire. So it was sort of like a smokescreen in a sense. It was more kabuki theater. The U.S. wants to make it look like, hey, no, we're leading the charge because we want to stop the violence. But in reality, it's more deflection and obfuscation. And so what ended up happening is Russia and China and Algeria vetoed the UN resolution that the U.S. brought up. So let me break this down for you. Arnaud Bertrand says the following, and he's replying to this Associated Press article. It says, Russia and China veto U.S. resolution calling for immediate ceasefire in Gaza. That's a very, very misleading headline from the Associated Press. He says that's quite dishonest framing by the AP, given that Russia, China, and Algeria vetoed the U.S. resolution for the very reason that it did not call for an immediate ceasefire. Instead, it merely asked to recognize the importance of a ceasefire and to support American negotiation efforts towards that purpose, which wouldn't have changed the situation on the ground one iota. That's the text of the resolution. Quote, listen to this. The Security Council determines the imperative of an immediate and sustained ceasefire to protect civilians on all sides, allow for the delivery of essential humanitarian assistance, and alleviate humanitarian suffering, and towards that end unequivocally supports ongoing internal diplomatic efforts to secure such a ceasefire in connection with the release of all remaining hostages. So that's the weasel language. That's the, the flowery words used to try to puff up the idea that, no, this is an immediate ceasefire, even though, as you could tell by the plain-faced reading and interpretation of this, it's not an immediate ceasefire. As the U.S. think tank Responsible Statecraft rightly writes, the clause does not demand a ceasefire, but determines that it is imperative. Its support is not directly for the ceasefire, but for the negotiation process the U.S. has been co-leading and whose parameters the U.S. has sought to determine in favor of Israel. The text points out that this effort to secure a ceasefire is in connection with the release of all remaining hostages. This is an Israeli demand that is not likely to be accepted by Hamas in return for a time-limited ceasefire rather than a permanent one. This is something we've talked about a number of times. Of course, they're going to reject any ceasefire that's like a 6-week time frame, because what's implied in that is as soon as the 6 weeks is up, we're going to go right back to doing what we're doing right now. They'd be insane to hop on board with that. As such, the American draft endorses the Israeli position in the negotiations and indirectly conditions the ceasefire on the release of all hostages, effectively making 2 million civilian Gazans hostages as well. the U.S. systematically vetoed all resolutions that were actually demanding an immediate ceasefire, so it's pretty clear they don't want one. This was a way to make it look like they were asking for one for PR purposes and for headline purposes from dishonest journalists such as the AP. Now, I don't know if the AP is being dishonest in this sense or if they just buy the State Department line, which is a lie, right? Like, they could either be stupid or they could be liars. But what happens now is exactly what you'd expect. So now the White House and all U.S. media outlets get to turn around and say, whoa, we were the ones who were in favor of a ceasefire, and we drafted a resolution to do a ceasefire. And China and Russia and Algeria, they blocked it. We're for peace, they're not for peace. So you see this game that's being played, it's nothing but PR bullshit, to sum it up very succinctly. All right, so now let me show you this. This video blew up a few days back. And it's always interesting to me seeing what are the things that pierce through and get beyond just the political junkies like myself and yourself and get to the mainstream American public, get to normie Americans. Because you can never predict what it's going to be, but every now and then a moment breaks through. So this moment here broke through, and I think it's because of the undeniable nature of it. So Al Jazeera was able to get some footage here of an Israeli army drone that pursued 4 civilians, kids, and murked them. As you're going to see, they're not even the tiniest hint of a threat. There's no guns. There's no weapons. They're not in close proximity to IDF soldiers and threatening them. They are just walking alone on a road, and then this happens.
وقذائف الاحتلال وعلى طريق أشبعتها آلياته تجريفا. انسحبت الآليات من المنطقة برا لكنها بقيت تترصد المدنيين جوا. حصلت الجزيرة على هذه الصور من طائرة مسيرة إسرائيلية من أسطول يحوم فوق غزة منذ ما قبل.
So we'll get to this. We'll do a separate segment on this, but this seemingly was the straw that broke the camel's back for AOC to go out there and clearly state Israel is committing a genocide against the Palestinians. This was the straw that broke the camel's back for Alex Jones, the right-wing conspiracy theorist. This was one of those things that was so undeniable that it really woke up a lot of regular Americans to the brutal reality of what we're currently witnessing. Now, look, I have to say, I don't know why this was the one, right? We already have over 40,000 Palestinians who've been killed. 40,000. Over 15,000 children. 92% of the 40,000 are innocent civilians. They've bombed schools and hospitals and standalone UN buildings and marketplaces and mosques and churches and every kind of civilian infrastructure you can imagine. They told people in the north, you got to go to the south to be safe. Then they bombed them on their road to the south. Then when they reached their final destination in the south, they bombed them there too. Now, 1 million or more Palestinians are stuck in an area the size of LAX airport at Rafah, and Netanyahu saying, we're going to invade there as well. There's literally no safe place in Gaza. We have all of these facts that built up upon each other since the beginning, and nothing seemed to fully pierce the consciousness of the American people where they said, you know what, I think this is genocide. Until this. So look, I'll take it that people are now waking up, but for the love of God, you should have seen this over 100 days ago, right? About 3 weeks into the post-October 7th, 3 weeks into it. It was very obvious what was happening. But this was the thing. By the way, Edward Snowden chimed in here. Everyone in the world needs to see this. Note that this footage permits no room for it was a mistake, showing repeated, specifically targeted strikes on the unarmed and even wounded, the sort of behavior the ICJ explicitly forbids in the genocide rulings against Israel. There you have it. All right, so Kamala Harris comes out. She does an interview with ABC News, and she says the following about if Netanyahu invades Rafah, what's supposed to be the last remaining safe place for the over 1 million civilians that are there in Gaza. Let's listen.
We have been clear in multiple conversations and in every way that any major military operation in Rafah would be a huge mistake. Let me tell you something. I have studied the maps. There's nowhere for those folks to go. And we're looking at about 1.5 million people in Rafah who are there because they were told to go there, most of them. And so we've been very clear that it would be a mistake to move into Rafah with any type of military operation.
A mistake, but would there be consequences if he does move forward?
Well, we're going to take it one step at a time, but we've been very clear in terms of our perspective on whether or not that should happen.
Are you ruling out that there would be consequences from the United States?
I am ruling out nothing.
I want to ask.
So look, I'm a bit skeptical and I'm a bit cynical and jaded at this point. So my reaction to this is, okay, Kamala, I'll believe it when I see it, right? I'll believe it when I see it. But having said that, it's definitely a video worth watching to understand what the new line is coming out of the administration. So they've yet to draw any red lines at all in any way, shape, or form. So, like I said, I'm very, very skeptical, but this certainly is harsher language than they've used previously. Okay, look at this. Israel announces largest West Bank land seizure since 1993 during Blinken visit. So yet again, this is another example of the Israeli government putting up a middle finger to the U.S. government. And in fact, it's going beyond that. It's spitting in the eye of Joe Biden and the White House. That's what this is. It's, oh, you think you wear the pants? You think you're in charge? You think we are your colonial outpost? How about we do what we want and you keep arming us and funding us? That's what this is. And like in the movie Tombstone, I would say to Biden, what are you going to sit there and bleed? Because the answer so far has been yes. But now they're going above and beyond. By the way, again, let's be clear. Announcing an illegal West Bank land grab, you do understand Hamas controls Gaza. Hamas does not control the West Bank. The West Bank is controlled by the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas, and they're viewed as basically collaborators with the Israeli government. So what this does is it demonstrates for you, it doesn't matter what Palestinians do. The reaction from the Israeli government is always the same. If it's Hamas, oh my God, you're violent terrorist extremists, we can never work with you. If you're the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas, they listen to the IDF all the time, but then boom, their land still gets stolen. And there's still violence enacted against Palestinians there. So damned if you do, damned if you don't if you're Palestinians. That should be crystal clear to everybody. All right, now, look at this. Israeli forces raped and then killed women at Al-Shifa Medical Complex, said Palestinian woman Jamila Al-Hisi, who is besieged at the hospital, to Al Jazeera. According to Hamila, occupation forces raped women and then killed them. Occupation forces burned and killed entire families. We haven't found food or water for 6 days. We appeal to the Red Cross to provide water for the children and the sick. The occupation forced 65 families to leave the area around the complex. Occupation forces burned the building we were barricaded in. We don't even have water to break our fast, and we don't know where to go. This verifies something that the UN came out with a couple weeks ago about how there has been many rapes of Palestinian women at the hands of the IDF. Now, this is one of those I told you so moments, but to be fair, it's not just me. It's a number of people who were looking at what was happening on the ground. Haaretz says the following. A Palestinian poll shows a sharp rise in support for Hamas's October 7th attacks among Gazans to 71%, up from 57% 3 months ago. Gee, I wonder why the support for Hamas shot up massively. Really tough one to figure out. Can't quite piece it together. Could it be that when Israel is trying to do a wholesale ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinians, and they've killed 40,000 Palestinians, including 15,000 children, and they've destroyed virtually all of North Gaza, could it be that violence and brutality begets more violence and brutality? And of course, if you're a Palestinian, you're going to want your own badass hardliners who say, I'm going to stand up and fight for you. I'm not going to let them just roll over us. Could it be that that's the case? So as I pointed out 1,000 times over, the idea that Israel says, oh my God, we're going to wipe out Hamas. We're going to destroy Hamas. There's going to be no more Hamas after this. How do you plan on doing that when probably in the time span of this war, you quadrupled the number of Hamas members. Do you know how many more people, how many more orphaned kids are now going to step up and say, I got nothing to live for. All I want is revenge and retribution. That's what's going to happen. So to the extent their actual goal is to eliminate Hamas, which it's not, but to the extent it is that, well, they objectively failed miserably because you're at least going to quadruple the recruitment for Hamas. And if they were to theoretically destroy Hamas, there'd be Hamas 2.0 in about 7.5 seconds. Who are we kidding here? So of course this was going to be the reaction. Jesus Christ. All but 2 Democratic senators just voted to give Israel $3.8 billion in weapons, violating U.S. law, defund a UN inquiry into Israel's violations of international law, defund UNRWA, worsening famine in Gaza, sanction the UN Human Rights Council if it highlights Israeli abuses. I know you're probably wondering who are the 2 Democrats who voted against these things. It's only Bernie Sanders and, get this, Michael Bennet, because to him, this bill didn't have enough support for Ukraine in it. So, yeah, he voted against it, but there's little asterisks there, right? Like, it's not like he did it for the correct reasons. Bernie's the only one who said, this is crazy, we can't do this. God damn. So you're probably thinking, just like everybody else, man, what would Israel have to do to get the money and weapons cut off? Literally, what would they have to do? And I got to be honest with you, I don't know if there's anything they could do that would lead the U.S. to actually cut off the weapons. I mean, maybe if they nuked Gaza, maybe then it would be like, okay, we're going to reduce the money going to them or temporarily suspend it, but bring it back in about 6 months. I don't know. I don't even know if nuking them would make it so that they say, you know what, we're going to cut off the weapons. But make no mistake about it, by the way, this makes us guilty as well of facilitating the genocide. There's no doubt, because we know what's going on now. There's no open question about it anymore. And also defunding UNRWA, which is the agency of the UN, which is giving the humanitarian aid to Palestinians at this moment. That is the U.S. saying, we will also sign up for starvation and famine. We will also do collective punishment of over 2 million Palestinian civilians. That's what this is. More children were killed in Gaza during the first 4 months of the genocide than were killed in all armed conflicts in the world between 2019 and 2022. That's a fact that should stick with you. All right, so now let's play this. Ken Klippenstein tweeted it. The Pentagon has no idea how aid would be delivered to Gaza from the pier it pledged to build. Jesus Christ. So as I pointed out early on when they announced this pier thing, it looked to me to just be PR ass covering. And I say that because if the U.S. wanted to insist on getting humanitarian aid to Palestinians, it's not that difficult to do it. Biden picks up the phone, calls Netanyahu, and says, I'm going to make this very simple. You either allow in 100% of the humanitarian aid, or you lose your money, you lose your weapons, you get condemned at the UN, you get sanctioned. That's all you have to do. One phone call, and it could be done. Instead, he hasn't made that phone call, and Biden knows that Israel is blocking over 70% of the aid going into Gaza. And they're not blocking it because, oh my God, there's some legitimate reason or there's bureaucratic red tape. No, they're doing it on purpose to starve Palestinians. So then came this goofy idea, this PR ass-covering maneuver of we're gonna build a port. Well, that takes a long time, and people need the relief now, right? But then the second thing is the logistics of that are also super difficult. And so when asked for more specifics on how the aid is going to be delivered once it's done, you get this answer.
And then on the pier, the Benavides set sail today.
Yep.
So we've got the pier elements moving forward. You've got the sailors and soldiers are starting to move forward.
Yeah.
What's going to be the Pentagon's role in kind of that final mile? Are you letting contracts for contractors to then deliver that aid into Gaza? What's kind of the final piece looking like?
So that's still something that's being worked out right now. And in terms of the distribution, that's not something that the U.S. military will be involved in. We are, the logistics, setting up, coordinating the movement of the humanitarian aid from either the floating pier or to that floating causeway. But that's something that, in terms of how the distribution of aid is going to happen once it gets into Gaza, that's not something that we're handling. In terms of contracts or how that's going to be done, whether it's through partners and allies, NGOs, I just don't have that for you right now. We're going to get there though.
Okay. So just to be clear, but will the Pentagon actually let the contracts that would distribute that final mile, or is that going to be state, or do we know actually who's going to be handling that?
There will be no U.S. military on the ground in Gaza. So again, who's handling that? I just don't have that for you.
Of the agencies, who's...
So look, this is where you open the door for people to rightly speculate about your true intentions and what the point of this really is, right? So there's a number of different options. Number one, this pier, like I said, is an ass-covering maneuver, and it may not even be built when all is said and done, right? It's going to take a long time anyway. As we know, they need the relief right now. This isn't a real solution. This is a solution to the PR problem of people knowing, hey, it looks like you don't give a fuck about these Palestinian civilians and they're going to die. And it's like, well, let's do this really convoluted, over-the-top, ridiculous plan in order to make it look like we care about the Palestinian civilians. So ultimately, it might not even be built, okay? Having said that, it also could be built. And in that scenario, there's further speculation about what the pier is really for. Some have speculated, and this is just speculation to be clear, we don't know for sure, but the pier could be about the natural gas that's off the coast of Gaza. That's one piece of speculation. Another is the pier could be a highfalutin way to try to get Palestinians out of there and ethnically cleanse the region even more. And the thing that we know about the pier, which just came out a week or two ago, is that it was actually Netanyahu's idea. And Biden put it out there like it was his own idea. I think enough has been said on this front. This is inexcusable. All right, so one of the things we've seen from the beginning of this all is that the IDF has not hesitated to TikTok or live stream or post their various war crimes. And they're proud of it. And they brag about it. So now we have this new example. It has to do with a pool in Gaza and the reaction of the IDF. If we don't get a pool, no one does, is what this guy says. So they just blew up the house with the pool. I guess Hamas was hiding under the pool, right? Is that what we're led to believe? Again, I don't know how anybody could look at this and then walk away thinking, Israel never targets civilians or civilian infrastructure. Well, how many fucking videos do you need to prove it to you that that's literally exactly what they're doing? This idea that we superimpose benign intentions on Israel or a defensive posture in Israel, absolutely absurd. How much more evidence do you need? All right, this one's hard to look at. I mean, look at this picture, man. Look at this picture. The New Yorker had an article, The Children Who Lost Limbs in Gaza. And here's a picture of a little girl who lost her leg. The children who lost limbs in Gaza, more than 1,000 children who were injured in the war, are now amputees. What do their futures hold? They were doing amputations and might still be doing amputations of limbs for 10 children a day. And by the way, without anesthesia. Tell me more about your hunt for Hamas, please. All right, we got more IDF war crimes posted on social media. Mute this. So they're joking around like, yeah, we're like playing by the beach. What a beach, a bouncing ball on Gaza beach. They're having fun. Blowing up some sort of a beach ball here. 7 weeks, we're here a long time. Yeah, they're kicking around a ball in an apartment building that they stole from Palestinians, attacked countless people around it, and they're having fun, man. They're having fun. They're really being defensive and protecting themselves, and now they're looking at the beach in Gaza and no doubt salivating about the resettling of the area. You guys know there's been a number of conferences with high-ranking Israeli government officials where they openly talk about the real estate on the water in Gaza. I'm going to have more on that for you in a little bit. We have a settler who comes out and says the quiet part out loud. Israeli West Bank settlers are seeking to resettle Gaza. Already enrolled 500 families. Okay, let's watch some of this. This is from CNN.
High in the hills of the occupied West Bank, a flag flies in the face of a Palestinian village. God is king, it says. 2 young settlers guard this illegal outpost. Construction hasn't even begun, but we are not welcome.
So they're asking us to leave. They don't want to talk to us. They said they've been here for about 9 months.
Dotted across the landscape, more signs of the fight to assert Israeli control over Palestinian land. The Arabic names on signposts crudely erased. Under international law, the Beit Hogla settlement is illegal. But last February, the Israeli government officially recognized it along with 8 others, a move the U.S. strongly opposed. We're here because God promised us this land, Azriel Picard tells us.
Now, I want you to stop and think about the argument that, say, Sam Harris uses when talking about this conflict. His idea is actually very similar to Netanyahu's idea. You have the forces of light versus the forces of darkness, the enlightened versus the barbaric. And, one of his main claims is those fundamentalist Muslims are so extreme, there's no working with them or negotiating or finding peace. They are drunk on the Kool-Aid of the Quran and Muhammad, and they are bloodthirsty, and they're religious extremists, and they really believe their texts. And here you have this guy, we're literally a minute into a CNN report. CNN has done generally a poor job covering this, right? But even they can't deny it at this point. This guy's like, God promised us this land in Gaza. God promised us this land. By the way, that's exactly what the West Bank settlers say as well. The illegal West Bank settlers. Jesus Christ.
Now,
so anyway, do you see his criticism coming against the other side? Do you see him talk about the religious extremism on the Israeli side? To the extent he talks about it in the context of this conflict, it is a side point. And the main focus is on one side is bad, the Palestinian Arabs and Muslims, and one side is generally good, the Israeli Jews.
These settlers have set their sights on a new prize, one that seemed utterly impossible before October 7th. Returning to Gaza, they cheer. That is the goal of Zionist settler organization Nachalah, one of more than a dozen groups now advocating for the reestablishment of Israeli settlements in Gaza. A recent promotional video even boasts that Gaza will become the next Riviera. Daniela Weiss is the godmother of the movement. She's already started recruiting from the 700,000-strong settler community of Israel.
We're just arriving now at a settlement in the occupied West Bank, and we're heading to a talk that Daniela Weiss is giving to a group of people who are potentially interested in resettling Gaza.
We are for the land of Israel and Ben Gvir, she says. About 20 people gather in the living room of a family home. Weiss knows that for many in this community, there is deep nostalgia for Gush Katif, a block of 21 Israeli settlements that were forcibly evacuated by the IDF in 2005 when Israel left the Gaza Strip.
Full context on that, they didn't leave the Gaza Strip full stop. They removed the few settlements that were inside Gaza, and then they basically did a full perimeter border military checkpoint where they turned Gaza into effectively an open-air prison. That was the move. I believe it was Ariel Sharon. That was his brilliant move to then separate the West Bank from Gaza and have this talking point of, bro, we're not even in Gaza anymore. I don't know what you're talking about, bro. I'm sure you've heard that 1,000. In 2005, we left Gaza. Where did they leave to? Where did they leave to? The perimeter, the border, where they were hyper-militarized, and they don't allow flow in and out of goods or people. So it is still an occupation. It's just a different kind of occupation from proper settlements within Gaza. So that's the full context of that.
This is the vision of Gaza, she says. You see all the nucleus groups. A map has already been drawn up, with 6 groups laying claim to different parts of the enclave.
So they've just been handing out these little booklets that say, people of Israel, return home, and then underneath, a call to return to the settlements of Gaza.
One of the organizers tells the group they have a representative flying to Florida to raise money. Nachalah gets support from a number of groups in the U.S., including AFSI, Americans for a Safe Israel, which co-sponsored a recent webinar on the...
How ironic is that? Americans for a Safe Israel, and their idea to make Israel safe is to steal Gaza ethnically cleanse it, and set up illegal settlements there. Yeah, that'll make it safe. That won't spark a colossal backlash, rightly so. Jesus Christ.
Turn to Gush Katif, even as the Biden administration has cracked down on settlements in the West Bank.
There is a very strong support from very prominent, from very, I would say, wealthy people, wealthy Jews.
In the U.S.?
In the U.S.
Can you name any names?
No, I cannot.
Gee, I wonder why. Could it be because they're violating international law? Gee, I wonder why they can't name names. Go ahead. By the way, go ahead and watch the rest of this video. Astonishing. Just stunning stuff, man. It's all out in the open. It's all out in the open, and then people will still deny what's going on here. CNN reports that at least 19 people have been killed from Israeli fire on Gaza residents who were waiting for humanitarian aid. Oh, would you look at that? Another flower massacre. Almost like they're happening all the time here. Must be some dastardly Hamas plot that was foiled by the brilliant idea. This was from Axios. Scoop. Blinken warned Netanyahu and his war cabinet in a meeting on Friday that Israel's security and its place in the world are in peril over failed Gaza strategy, and, quote, you might not realize it until it's too late. So in other words, yet again, another finger wave. Sir, you're being a little too blatant with your war crimes. Reel your war crimes in 12.5% so you can let us save face and run cover for you. Again, that's what I think this is. Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. I would love to be proven wrong. Blinken, Biden, any of you guys. You want to take actual, you want to make Israel pay any actual consequences? Cut off their money, cut off their weapons. You know they're going to invade Rafah. Do it and do it now. I won't hold my breath. Israeli soldier openly admits to war crimes. Quote, we blew up the houses of terrorists, mosques, UN offices. I remember we got into some UN office in charge of helping families in Gaza affected by the war, and we destroyed it.
My unit was in charge of explosions. We blew up houses of terrorists, mosque, UN offices. I remember we got into some UN office that was in charge of helping families in Gaza that was affected by the war, and we destroyed it.
As I've pointed out time and time again while covering this, what you see is oftentimes the Israeli government and Israeli citizens who support this and the IDF, they are way more open and honest with what they're doing and what they support than what you see in typically Western media, with some exceptions, and from U.S. politicians. So, I don't know, whose word do you take on it? I believe what my eyes show me, what the evidence points to. All right, so now we talked about Alex Jones the other day. Alex Jones came out and said, Israel has lost the high ground. This is not war. It is robotic mass genocide. He basically goes on to say Israel's committing genocide, and this is like kind of obvious at this point. That was a surprise to many people that Alex Jones said that. And now I believe this was from a little while ago, I think, but Tucker also is saying similar things, not as strong as what Alex Jones is saying, but let's listen.
U.S. aid, military aid to Israel, and the implied security guarantees, some explicit, but many implied security guarantees of the United States to Israel probably haven't helped Israel that much long term. It's a rich country with a highly capable population. Like every other country, it's probably best if it makes its decisions based on what it can do by itself. And I don't see any advantage to the United States. I mean, I think it's important for each country to make its own decisions. Again, I don't think you can overstate the lack of wisdom, weakness, short-term thinking of American foreign policy leadership. These are the architects of the Iraq War, of the totally pointless destruction of Libya, totally pointless destruction of Syria, and the 20-year occupation of Afghanistan that resulted in a return to the status quo. So like of the Vietnam War, their track record of the Korean War, even going back 80 years, is uninterrupted failures. I just don't have any confidence in those leaders to improve. When was the last time they improved another country?
So as I always point out when discussing these conservative folks who are not pro-Israel, there's usually two schools of thought on the right when it comes to Israel, broadly speaking. You have what I'd call like the Richard Hanania types, which are honestly just kind of jealous of the fact that Israel has an ethno-state. So they support it. Also, they do the, eugenics, race science type stuff where it's like, oh, the Ashkenazi Jews, really high IQ. We got to ally ourselves with the folks with the really high IQ. So there's one group that's just over the top, fawning, adoration, love for Israel. Then you have the other group, which you should be somewhat skeptical of because there's a lot of, let's call it what it is, a lot of Nick Fuentes type opposition to Israel. Where, from Nick Fuentes' perspective, there's an evil satanic cabal of dastardly Jews who are secretly running the world, and Israel is the purest manifestation of that. And so that's why they oppose Israel. So there are those two schools of thought on the right. If you want to be kind, you could say a third school is just the somewhat non-interventionist, isolationist types who just don't want the U.S. to be bogged down in wars for other countries, etc. That's if I'm really steel-manning the perspective. But always be a little skeptical when you see arguments coming from certain corners here, because usually it's not with the purest of intentions. Now, having said that, as I pointed out to you guys, a lot of this recent shift is from that one video that undoubtedly shows these young boys walking, probably, teenage boys or whatever it is, walking and just getting murked out of nowhere when they're not even a tiny threat. That seems to have woken up a lot of people to the nature of what's really going on here. It's validated the most aggressive perspectives against Israel and shown this for what it is, really ripped the mask off of it. All right, so now I'll show you this. Net support for the U.S. providing humanitarian aid to help Palestinian civilians. It's plus 30 overall. In other words, people see what's going on the news. They see the devastation, and they can't help but feel sympathy and want to help. Among 18 to 29-year-olds, they're plus 31 to send humanitarian aid to Palestinians. 65 and older is actually plus 41. I'm kind of surprised by that older people are actually more in favor than younger people. Among Muslims, it's plus 65%. Among Jews, it's plus 41%. So in other words, basically every group, every demographic in this country is like, man, look at what's going on there. It's unacceptable. They need help, and we got to send it to them. All right, so here we go. Another example of people openly discussing what their plans are.
We love the Gaza Strip. We can't just take a whole strip of land and say Israelis can't live there. That doesn't make sense. This is our sovereign state.
Would you live there?
Of course.
By the beach?
Oh, for sure. Yes, my husband's also talking about building. He has a yeshiva, a Talmudic institute here, so building a branch in Gaza. We have lists already about 500 families that are willing, on the drop of a hat, to just move into. We have North, Central, and South Gaza, and people are going to start building towns. We have names of the towns. We have where we're building them. It's already being planned, and we have people signed up. You can't leave it without Jews in the Gaza Strip. It's too big a piece of land. It's too important for us to let it become Hamas town, as we call it, full of terrorists. We love the.
So here you have a New Yorker from Brooklyn. She's like, yeah, illegally steal it, resettle it. That's what we need to do. And finally, I'll leave you with this. So Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the ADL, agreed with this tweet. There's no whinier human alive than the anti-Zionist Jews, most of them probably fake, who are now raging in the responses to my wife's extremely reasonable tweet. As Jason Rosenberg points out, ADL CEO endorsing a tweet calling anti-Zionist Jews fake Jews. Every time I think Greenblatt and ADL can't go lower, they do. By the way, Greenblatt and the ADL were leading the charge to try to get TikTok banned. They're trying to get that bill through the most. Why? Because there's a lot of pro-Palestine stuff and anti-Israel stuff on TikTok, and they can't allow that. They want to censor that. They want to ban that. All right, guys. So as soon as I finished recording my full Israel segment, we get a colossal update that I have to share with you. And this, for the first time in a very long time, is potentially phenomenal news. So the UN Security Council, which, by the way, is where the actual decisions are made, is not the General Assembly, which is more like, virtue signaling bills passed. This is where the actual power rests. The Security Council passed a Gaza ceasefire. The U.S. didn't vote for it, but they abstained, and all the other countries voted in favor of it. So for the first time, that allows it to stand. The U.S. does not block the resolution, and this resolution is apparently not one of the bullshit Weasley ones with the Weasley language. It demands an immediate ceasefire. So we had just discussed the U.S. specific resolution, which was incredibly vague and weaselly and used flowery language and, really was more about we support the process of eventually getting to a ceasefire. This is not that. This is real language here. So Trita Parsi says the following. This was before it passed. The Security Council is scheduled to vote on a new resolution at 10 a.m. today that explicitly demands a ceasefire in Gaza. Here's a short thread analyzing the resolution, which is expected to pass. There were intense negotiations this past weekend over this new ceasefire resolution. It is put forward by 10 countries: Algeria, Guyana, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, and Switzerland. That is, all of the non-permanent members of the Security Council. By Friday of last week, when Russia and China vetoed Biden's draft resolution, the E10 resolution had 3 operative clauses: demanding an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, demanding the immediate and unconditional release of the hostages, and emphasizing the urgent need to expand the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Over the weekend, intense negotiations took place following a threat from the U.S. that it would veto any resolution that didn't support the diplomacy on the ground, i.e. the diplomatic efforts of Qatar, Egypt, and the U.S. The Biden administration sought to link a ceasefire with the release of all hostages, that is, making progress on one issue dependent on complete progress on the other. The linkage could also make one issue hostage to the other. This is the Israeli position, in which it wants no pressure against its indiscriminate bombing of Gaza until all hostages are released, effectively making the entire population of Gaza hostages. The most immediate consequence of such a linkage is that the war and killing would continue, since no issue can be resolved until all issues are resolved. The other countries rejected the U.S. demand, insisting that both the release of hostages and a ceasefire are imperative and should not be linked, as it otherwise would provide justification for Israel's indiscriminate bombing of Gaza, since Hamas hasn't released all the hostages, which is why Israel and Biden have pushed for this linkage. The version that will be voted on, unless the text has changed overnight, does not accommodate the U.S. demand. Instead, it combines the two demands, ceasefire and hostage release, into one single operative clause, but without linking the two issues. Here's how the operative clause currently reads. Demands an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan and respected by all parties, leading to a permanent, sustainable ceasefire, and also demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as ensuring humanitarian access to address their medical and other humanitarian needs, and further demands that the parties comply with their obligations under international law in relation to all persons they detain. Secondly, the Biden administration tried to change the language of the resolution to support the diplomatic efforts co-led by the U.S., but this is a process that thus far has been unsuccessful, partly because the U.S. has pushed its parameters to meet all Israeli demands. This includes linking a ceasefire with the release of all hostages, including male soldiers. Anyway, this goes on. Guys, this is a big deal. It's a big deal that this passed. Potential downsides. I mean, I guess it's possible Israel just blows it off and doesn't listen to it, right? I guess that's possible. But the fact that the U.S. abstains tells me maybe there was some pressure, some leverage that the other countries had that they used with the U.S. to get the U.S. to back off and abstain. That's just speculation, but, it's certainly a potential scenario that could have led to where we ended up. So now let me show you this. Note the applause as the UN Security Council, as they passed the ceasefire resolution. Here we go.
Draft resolution contained in document S/2024/254. Please raise their hand. Those against? Abstention. The result of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, 0 vote against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2728, 2024.
That never happens. That never happens. The United Nations Security Council has voted 14-0 to demand immediate ceasefire for Ramadan, leading to lasting, sustainable ceasefire, immediate unconditional release of all hostages. U.S. abstained even after successfully pushing to replace word permanent with lasting. And then this happened in response. And this is how you know it's at least somewhat real. This is how you know. Breaking: Netanyahu cancels the departure of an Israeli delegation for talks at the White House about Rafah after the U.S. abstains on a Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of all hostages. If they felt like they could just blow this off completely and continue going with business as usual, then he wouldn't throw this tantrum. And this tantrum shows he's mad at the U.S. That's what this shows. So what's going to happen from here? Yet to be seen, but this is the first time that some real international pressure has been brought to bear on Israel. And my speculation is probably the U.S. behind the scenes, that these 10 countries use whatever leverage they have in order to try to force the hand of the U.S. to agree to this. But this is the best news that we've heard in a while vis-a-vis this. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.